Conveniently, there's a center at the bottom of the shifter shaft so that the tip of the puller stud could sit into, so we could easily pull off the old bushing with the 3-jaw puller. And this is what that old bushing looks like. Let's make a new one. The new nylon bushing that came with the Miata shifter rebuild kit. I've sized up all the sizes that I need. I have my brass material. I have all the tools I need, including a center drill, 406 drill, smallest boring bore I could find, snap gauge, mic, turning tool. That should be all I need to make one of these out of brass. So let's head on over to the lathe. So we have our brass material chucked up in the lathe. It's about 1-inch OD, solid. So what we'll do is we'll start off by facing the front of it with the turning tool, and then run that across 2 different times. And each time I'm going to move the tool over about 10 thousandths. Give about 2 face cuts, even 3 if you want to be absolutely sure that you have it faced. But generally 2 is fine, especially if the end of the material has been cut fairly straight. Now we're going to come in with the center drill. Anytime you're going to bore out material on the lathe, you always want to start with the center drill first. That way, when you start stepping up in drill sizes, they're not going to walk out on you. They're going to be going into the material pretty straight into your center drilled hole. So we're making this brass shifter bushing, and I have to be very careful that I don't go past the sizes that I've laid out on that sheet of paper. So what I'm doing here is I'm touching the turning tool a little bit further down than the 430 thousandths of an inch length that I want to end up with. So I touched it down the material about 30 thousandths past that, about 460 thousandths of an inch. So just under half an inch long is where I touched the tool at. And I'm going to machine down to that, because what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to cut this piece off of the rest of the brass material. That way I can flip it around later in a 3-jaw chuck and face the other side. That way both sides are true and flat. So now I'm turning down the OD, and I'm going to take about 70 thousandths at a time, and I'll check it once I get closer. And my final OD size is going to be 735 thousandths. But anytime that you're going to bore out the inside and turn down the outside, you never want to turn down all the outside at once. So I'm actually going to turn it down, leave about 50 thousandths over what I need before I get to my final size. So I actually left it at about 778 thousandths of an inch, and then I'll go in and bore out with my 406 drill. Because if you finish your OD size first and don't even start boring out the middle of your material, you actually might, because it can get real thin towards the finished piece. In this case, the finished piece is, I believe, 735 thousandths minus 590, which is going to be, what, 135 thousandths? And then you got to half that, so we're talking about a 1/16 of an inch thick. So at that thin of a piece of material, you might actually throw off either your ID or OD if you just machine down the whole OD down to the finished size and then machine down the inside all the way. You actually might throw off the outside diameter size. That's why you always want to leave a little meat left, little material left on the outside, and come back and finish that later. So now that I've drilled through the middle, 406 thousandths drill bit, as far down as I need. Now my tiniest boring bar, I do not have a smaller boring bar than this. It just barely fits in the hole. And I'm going to start to bore out very light cuts, because this boring bar has a very small tip cutter on it. So I'm just going to take light cuts. The heaviest cut I took at a time was 20 thousandths, which is not really much at all. And my snap gauge barely doesn't fit in there. The starting snap gauge size for that size snap gauge is half an inch, 500 thousandths. So I actually have to use the calipers to check the ID size for now. And I'm also checking the depth, because the calipers can also plunge into a hole, especially a blind hole, to check the depth, because I'm actually only going to I bored through 406 thousandths with the drill bit, and that's going to be all the way out through the other side of this brass shifter bushing. But there's going to be a counter bore that's only 335 thousandths of an inch deep, which is just a little over 5/16 of an inch deep. And I'm going to have that counter bore be bored out to 590 thousandths because I mic'd the ball end of the shifter, which is going to sit in the shifter bushing. And with my 0 to 1 mics, I got 589 thousandths of an inch. So I'm going to go 1/1000th of an inch over because the nylon bushing they give you, it's actually slightly smaller than 589 thousandths, and it's designed so that you can actually click or snap in the ball end of your shifter into that nylon piece. But a brass piece, it doesn't have that flex, especially not at this thickness. Maybe at a much, much thinner thinness, if you will, but not at this thickness. So that's why I'm going 1/1000th of an inch over. That way, the ball end of the shifter can just barely slide in. But if you were to move the ball end of the shifter up and down or side to side, it would barely have any play whatsoever. Now, of course, because it's round, you're going to be able to move it, or tilt it forward, back, and left to the right. But in terms of play, it's a very, very good fit. Only 1/1000th of an inch bigger. So now that I have the counterbore finished, I'll go back to the outside diameter of my piece. And this time, because I'm only 50 thousandths, give or take, over, I'm only going to take light cuts because now I don't want to have any chance of messing up my inside diameter. Like if I just went hog wild and took off, let's say, 40 or more thousandths at a time, now that the piece is so thin, I just don't want to risk that. So that's why I'm only going to take 20 thousandths at a time. Just make sure I'm going carefully and don't want to mess my piece up at this point because you don't want to start over. I just want to do it all in one go without messing up. And actually, I almost messed up because when I touched the turning tool to the material for the last pass, because what I do is my second to last pass, I'll run the turning tool down the outside of the material, turn that section down, and I'll actually back the tool off the material, then crank it away, check my size, and for my last pass, I'll touch the material again with the tip of the turning tool, and then feed in however many more thousandths of an inch that I need. But I actually touched it to the material just a little bit too hard, so it actually went into the material like 2 thousandths when I only wanted to touch it. When you touch it, it basically doesn't go into the material at all, really. Maybe like 1/10 of a thousandth of an inch. But I got really lucky because I fed in about 7 thousandths of an inch on the dial, and it ended up taking exactly what I needed to get that 735 thousandths of an inch outside diameter. I'm going to take one last test fit with my shifter ball just to make sure it fits into that bushing part. Make sure me turning down the outside diameter didn't affect the inside at all, which it did not. And I'll just take a piece of emery paper, piece of sandpaper, just finish off that burr, just take it off real lightly, sand it off. That way once I install this piece down in the transmission, in the hole that it fits into, I won't have to worry about a burr holding me up. Because I believe it should just sit right down in there. I don't think it shouldn't really be a press fit in case you have to take it out later on. So there's the inside, looking real shiny. Didn't have to sand down the inside at all. Very happy about that because you always get a nice shiny finish. And I cut it on the bandsaw, and I come back, chuck it up in the lathe, and I cut it just a hair longer than maybe I perhaps needed to, but that's okay. Always leave yourself a little bit more than not enough, because I can just take this little bit off with the turning tool. And once I've machined that piece off, then I can start doing my face cuts. And when I do my face cuts, I'm going to be measuring with the mics, my 0 to 1 mics, the overall length of the material each time I do a couple face cuts, because I'm trying to get down to that 430 thousandths of an inch overall length. So I'm going to be very, very careful. And I actually, not pictured, but up above, there's a digital readout. So when I crank the big handle over to move the turning tool closer to the material, I can see exactly down to the 1/2 of an inch how much I'm moving the turning tool towards the material and towards the chuck. And so for this last part, I had to put a little chamfer on this side of the shifter bushing because this side's going to go down into the transmission, and it just has a nice chamfer so that you can start the piece easily down in to the hole that it sits in the transmission on the Miata. But I had to stop the lathe, put the turning tool up against the chuck, like touch it while it wasn't moving, and then back it off just a hair away from the chuck. That way I could get my length of the chamfer that I needed and get the piece finished up and get it looking good. And I took it over to the yellow little sanding wheel just to take off the tiniest burr that I felt after I finished filming this video. And I'm checking one last time my size on the overall length. Always just keep doing your final measurements. Measure twice, 3 times, however many times you need to feel confident that your piece is good on all sizes for what the thing is, for the application that you're trying to do or use it for. And I'll just take a tiny piece of sandpaper, polish up that inside section. Again, take away any burrs, and now we are done basically machining our own brass shifter bushing for a 1990 Miata. So thank you for watching, and I will have an install video coming soon, putting the shifter assembly back together with the new rebuild kit from Miata, and then the Miata will be back in service. Like and subscribe, or do whatever you want. Just drop me a comment. And this is the comparison of the brass one next to the white nylon one that they send you in the basic kit. Thanks for watching. See you next video.